Hey everybody, this is Courtney Rowland and Mark Passwater. Jamie McCoy will probably be joining us here shortly. This is the Aggie Yell F Word podcast. Welcome to this week's podcast. Mark, it is now dead period for recruiting in Texas A&M, well, everywhere. And A&M finished the cycle with their second junior day. Can you talk about that and how that all went? Did anything offers go out? Anyone commit?
Well, no commits, but wasn't really expecting any either. But I thought it was a pretty good haul of prospective talent over the 2 weekends. You got guys like Kobe Black and Micah Hudson, uh, Ryan Wingo. We're talking about high 4 stars, 5 stars. Those are just a couple of names that come to mind. It was a pretty significant amount of talent that came in. And it wasn't just 2024 guys. They did a very good job, I think, of identifying 2025s, getting them in. They even had some 2026 kids in. And
Wow.
I think that the way recruiting is today, that if the sooner you can get after somebody, the better. Because
Oh, for sure.
you've seen it as well as anyone. The process starts so much earlier now, and the competition is so strong for some of these elite talents that the faster you can start building up these relationships, the better off you are. So, it may sound ridiculous to have 15-year-olds coming into your junior day, but it may actually benefit you in the long term.
You said, you were talking about the process, right? So the process of recruiting has certainly changed, as we've talked about in podcasts previously with the portal, et cetera, and the multiple signing days, everything like that. It seems to me like Jimbo Fisher likes to stick to the kind of the old process, right? Recruiting from the high school. And not very much using the portal all that much because the turnover margin, as far as players leaving versus players coming, I think what was it, plus 20 to 3.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that process that Jimbo Fisher uses and if you foresee that working?
Yeah, it's a good question because certainly if there is a press conference on Wednesday for National Signing Day, which normally happens, I don't think I'd phrase the question, dude, what the heck? But I'm definitely gonna ask, you know, why there has been a hesitation to really get after it on the portal. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I know that he wants to bring guys in, he wants to develop his own, program, and there's a process that he wants to do, and that's all well and good. But there's not much left out there. I mean, A&M's in the running for one JUCO player, I think, at this point. You
Mm-hmm.
got to get out there and get some more guys, and maybe they will after National Signing Day. You don't
When is
know.
that? When can they do that? Like, how does that all work?
Oh, if you're a transfer and a school wants you, and you're in the portal, you can sign whenever you want. You
Mm-hmm.
know, at this point, you just can't come in for spring ball. Because the ad drop period has passed. You would be a summer entry. And maybe that means that A&M still gets somebody like a Tyler Harrell from Alabama, the wide receiver that was originally at Louisville with Bobby Petrino. They're after the defensive backs from Ole Miss, Davison Igbinosun being one of them. They may be still in on that, but I would think that they would have moved a little more swiftly considering the needs that they have. And, by my estimation, they still have at least 8 spots open, and maybe they're going to wait a little longer and, they'll see where they stand after spring ball and then emphasize things after the second transfer window. But I mean, it isn't like it's a big secret here. You've got needs at linebacker, you got needs at wide receiver, and neither have been addressed. Well, I say wide receiver hasn't been addressed. They did a real good job getting Raymond Cottrell and Tyron Smith and uh, Micah Tees, but still, you have openings there that need to be filled. Linebacker, you absolutely have needs, and you could use some offensive linemen, you could use some more defensive backs. You got your starter set, but depth is still an issue. So, I'm kind of curious to see what their thinking is, and if this is just bad luck or they have some better idea in mind.
Right. Yeah, it is interesting to see. And I think off season will tell the story. And A&M comes off such a remarkable, recruiting class. The best ever, best probably anyone will ever do. It was just crazy, but sometimes that doesn't always pan out. Where A&M sits right now, I believe you said the Rivals ranking is number 14. How do
Yeah.
you see that panning out for the Aggies versus how it panned out when they were the number one, recruiting class?
It's a great question, and I don't know how you actually answer it.
Mhm.
You know, you take a look at last year's recruiting class and you're like, oh, this is killer. These guys have so much talent. Yeah, and unfortunately, in some cases, you had the Crash Davis Nucleoluche syndrome where you got a bunch of $1 million arms and 5-cent heads, and a
Mhm.
lot of those guys are gone. Now, on the other hand, did you have fellows that produced? Absolutely. Walter Nolan is going to be a star, I think. LT Overton, Shamar Stewart, obviously Connor Wiegman and Evan Stewart did their thing. Donovan Green, all those guys were really good in their first season. So, do you sit there and you say this is a net success? Yeah, absolutely. But there's some embarrassing blunders there too, and maybe A&M got blinded by the stars. And it wouldn't be the first time that that's happened. We've seen that with LSU, we've seen it with Alabama, where they've had the opportunity to go out there and get these huge classes and sometimes get some guys that just aren't good fits personally.
Mhm.
And certainly we saw some guys that got run out of town and needed to be run out of town.
Mhm.
With the 2023 class, I think certainly they were a little more conservative. They're a little more hesitant until, they couldn't be. I mean, you take a look at the end where they were racing to get Marcel Reed and they were racing to get Jalen Platt and, uh, you know, Tease and Raymond Cottrell. Uh, these were issues that they should have addressed earlier, but for whatever reason they didn't.
Mhm.
Uh, So, what can we think of the 2023 class? I think it filled a lot of needs, but you didn't get Anthony Hill, and that is a stinger. Uh, on the other hand, you may have got the best player in the country in DJ Hicks.
Mhm.
Um, and when you take a look at it, you have Walter Nolan, who was number 2 last year. You have Hicks, who was number 3 this year. You know, team these guys together up front with a couple other 5 stars. That can be really nasty and could make this class look a whole lot better as a whole because people are going to emphasize, one or two players. And if one of those players is Hicks, automatically you're in a good situation.
Right. And sometimes, numbers and rankings is just overrated. For unfortunately for the Aggies last year, rankings was overrated in a negative way, being what a top preseason top team, like sixth, or I think they were right.
Yeah.
Um, but sometimes it can be overrated. I think the Aggies are going to surprise. At least I hope so for Jimbo Fisher's sake, because a 5-7 team is just not going to fly this year. Where does he sit with that? Like, where does he sit? Is he obviously on the hot seat? What has to happen this year?
Well, I think that he definitely is feeling the heat, and
Mhm.
certainly having a big contract may have saved him. I think that he's got a few things that he needs to do, and he's obviously addressed some of them already. Uh, they had to change the offense. They knew they had to change the offense. Bringing in Petrino is at least a valiant step in trying to do that. I think that he needs to be, and I think he recognizes this fact. I think he needs to be more hands on in the locker room,
Right.
and because you know there was a lot of crap last year, and
Hmm.
that happens in every program. But when you have the spotlight on you, the way A&M did, the way A&M now does, and his past history at FSU, you can't afford to have crap like that happen
Mm-mm.
consistently. It's just a bad look. It will hurt you long term, and I don't think that there's much tolerance for it. So being more hands on with the locker room is going to be critical. Um, you know, I think that the opportunity is there for A&M to make a big jump, and a lot of it has to do with what we were talking about the last 2 classes. You're going to go out there next year, and your starting 4 up front are probably going to be Fadil Diggs, McKinley Jackson, Walter Nolan, and Shamar Stewart. That's an awful lot of talent, and that's not even talking about what they can bring in behind them.
Mm-hmm.
I think they did a real good job rebuilding the cornerback room. Tony Grimes, I think, is a player. You and I have talked about him for what, 5 years now?
Long
Uh,
time.
yeah, I mean, I like Bravian Rogers and Javon Thomas. Sam McCall is from FSU. Is a guy I think could be really good, and obviously Tyreek Chappelle is awesome. Getting Damani back. Here's a guy that you can move all around. He can be the answer to a lot of questions
Mm-hmm.
because he's got that size. He can come downhill, and maybe he can help out. I wouldn't say as a linebacker, but as a guy that roams around the field. He can get up in the box. You can have another safety behind him. I think that Jardine Gilbert is really good. He may be the most underrated player on the team. So defensively, I think that they're going to be good as long as the guys up front, the defensive ends especially, have improved. Uh, on offense, you return the entire offensive line. Weigman will be back. Obviously he's got Evan Stewart, he's got Donovan Green, he's got Moose. He's probably going to have Anias, and we'll talk more about that in a second. Uh, you know, the starters at receiver I really like. Starters at tight end I really like. Again, it's just the depth thing. And if you can get that offensive line to take a big step, because they stunk last year, you
Mm-hmm.
know, but we know the talent's there individually. They've been very good. And when you go Zune, Dewberry, Foster, Layden Robinson, and Deuce Fothery, you got a lot of size there, you got a lot of strength. And honestly, all those guys are smart. They're not dumb offensive linemen.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you can get that bunch to work together as a cohesive unit and they can do the things that Petrino wants them to do, you know, there's a lot of reason for optimism, but you've still got to build up your depth and you've got to make sure that everybody has their head screwed on right.
Yeah. And I kind of want to, like you said, has their heads screwed on right. I kind of want to touch base about that. You said, Jimbo Fisher definitely needs to be more hands on in the locker room, in control of the players and what all is going on, because it just can't happen as much as it did last year. And it was a series of bad events after bad events. And those issues have been taken care of, and players have left and asked to leave, etc. But so what about like right now? We kind of know what the deal is during the football season, right? And during training camp and fall camp and spring camp. We know the players are there almost 24/7, right?
Right.
And meetings. But what about right now? How is Jimbo and team and company kind of keeping an eye on these guys, or what are the players doing right now?
Well, that's another great question. You're on a roll. But you look at it, and this is kind of the time when opportunity exists for bad things to happen.
Mm-hmm.
There is an off-season program going. They're lifting weights and they're watching film and all that stuff. And it's still a time where the oversight isn't as great as it could be or maybe should be, but this is not an A&M related thing. This is just how the NCAA has it set up.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got to find a way to not only monitor the activities of your players, but to make sure that crappy stuff, bad stuff is not happening.
Right.
And sometimes that's just going to come down to the leadership of your players. And
Mm-hmm.
that means that it's going to be on guys like Isaiah Rakes and Diggs and Layden Robinson and Damani, to make sure that these guys
Fall in
follow the
line.
straight and narrow.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm sure the message has been given not only by the coaches, but by, the upperclassmen that look, we can't afford to have another screw up like we did last year off the field.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be consequences. And I'm sure that the athletic department and the football program have relayed that message pretty firmly to the players that you cannot screw up again. Even though you guys weren't the ones who did it,
You,
anything that goes bad is going to be dealt with. And it
Mm-hmm.
may not just be the football program that pushes that. It may be the athletic director himself saying, "Look, you know, this was an embarrassment. You humiliated the university."
Grow
And
up.
I say you, the football team as a whole, with
Mm,
the actions of players that are largely no longer there. You know, you got to sit there and say, "Look, we had to make an example of these guys because they screwed up. They embarrassed the university. They humiliated the university. They humiliated you. Don't let it happen again."
correct. Yeah. Yeah, they can't afford for it to happen again, like you were saying. You mentioned Petrino some in the offense, the offensive line, how things need to change there. Is everything still the same as far as offensive line coach goes? Because I know there were some rumblings that some players weren't on the same page as the offensive line coach. And then also with that, some have described Petrino as a offensive genius mind. What would you say to that?
I would not disagree. To be perfectly honest, he's done a lot with different personnel. You take a look at how he started when he first got to Arkansas. He had a limited amount of talent. He maximized it, used the tight end a lot, the running game, used his receivers out of the backfield. But then as Ryan Mallett came in and you got some of these explosive receivers, they opened it up and threw a lot more. Then he gets to Louisville and he's got Lamar Jackson, and all of a sudden the quarterback running game becomes a big part of it. He built the offense around the athletic ability of his quarterback. So you look at how he's adapted. I think that's one of the best selling points about him is the fact that he has shown that he can adapt his offense to uh, what he's got, and that's an important thing with A&M because you take a look at what Jimbo ran. Jimbo ran the same system, whether it was Kellen Mond, whether it was Jameis Winston, whether it was Connor Weigman, Haynes King, Max Johnson. It was
Yeah.
all the same stuff all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, people figured it out. So with the adaptability that Petrino has shown, I think that's very favorable for A&M because you don't want to get in that rut.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the thing that you and I talked about for several years. It's not just a rut with play calling, which Jimbo absolutely was guilty of,
Mm-hmm.
going back to even at Florida State. But, just the rut with the scheme. It was the same old stuff. There was no adapting to your opponent, unless it was Alabama, in which case he was brilliant and he would come up with all kinds of different stuff and mess with their minds. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but it wasn't that way every week, and I think that was counterproductive. Petrino has shown that he can adapt and adjust and maximize what he can do with his talent. The problems with Bobby Petrino are not what he can do at a whiteboard or on a football field. It's what he does when he's out of the office.
Mm.
You know,
Kind of what we were just talking about.
he- like I told you, yeah. I mean, like you and I talked about when he was first hired. It's like I've never heard a bad thing about him as an offensive mind. I've never heard a good thing about him as a person. Uh, and maybe the last couple years at FCS and just age have mellowed him because I haven't heard
Mhm.
anything bad yet. And he's been active. He's been involved with the recruiting process and things of that sort. So, fingers crossed. I mean, because if he's a guy that people find they can relate to and they like, and he's still the same offensive guru that he has been, then this is a great deal for A&M. On the other hand, if he comes in and he's still a butthead, then Jimbo's probably going to kill him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that won't go well. But hopefully he has learned that he can't afford any more screw ups.
Yes. I mean, it's interesting because this program has a lot going for it. But on the other hand, you also have a lot of people who are running out of opportunities.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned Petrino and how he can adjust his system. Let's say Petrino gets to keep a player like Anais Smith. So let's talk about Anais. He has until when to make a decision. And you were also bringing up earlier about what the NFL released as far as combine invites, etc.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about Anais. If he does stay at A&M, how Petrino could use him.
Okay. Anias has until Friday to officially withdraw from the draft, February the 3rd. A couple of weeks ago, the NFL put out a list of players that were draft eligible juniors. And
Hmm.
you took a look at it, and it had Jalen Jones, it had Antonio Johnson, Devon Achane, Bryce Young, Will Anderson, all the guys you were expecting. But at the bottom of this list, it said there are 6 players who have inquired with the NFL about their draft status, but could withdraw by the February 3rd deadline. And there were 5 guys that you sat there and went, why in the world did you even bother? No,
Hmm.
you're an undrafted free agent. And then the last one was Anias Smith. And, with all the rumblings we'd heard and the rumors and all that, I saw that and thought the NFL has probably just tipped his hand.
Hmm.
He's coming back. Um, and you take a look at it, combine invites have gone out. The Senior Bowl is next week. The East West Shrine game's coming up. The NFLPA game is coming up. These are the showcase events for seniors and, draft eligible players. He's
Hmm.
not involved. And
Real quick, where is he injury wise? Is he
so
even
far as I know, he should be ready to go about the time that spring ball begins.
okay?
Um, the a broken ankle is a bee with an itch behind it. That can be really difficult to come back from. It's a multi-month recovery process. But on the other hand, you're talking about a guy who has access to very good health care. Uh, Surgery was quick. He's in great shape. He's a young man. The recovery process for him is probably a whole lot easier than it would be for somebody like me. Um, so I think that he'll probably be ready to go around. He could actually be ready now. I mean, feasibly, you take a look at the time frame, he could be, you know, up and going. But you just when you have an injury like that, a broken ankle, and it happens fairly early in a season that is a potential make or break for you.
Hmm.
Uh Actually, that's a horrible term to use considering what we're talking about. But you take a look at it. There was so much on the table for him, and he was off to a fantastic start. And then you get that ankle injury, and I think that the NFL was just so wary of it, that they
Hmm.
were so concerned about the severity of that basically he went in thinking I may be a mid-round draft pick, and they're like, no, you got to prove this to us. You got to
Hmm.
prove you're healthy. Otherwise, no, you're probably not going to get drafted. So, that would certainly lead me back.
Right.
Uh, that and the opportunity to get a master's for free would probably be more than enough to get me to reconsider and come back and use that 5th season. So I think that's what he's going to do. I think all the indicators are there. I mean, could he change his mind? Yeah, sure. But I think that the smart move right now for Anias would be to come back and play in this offense.
And
And
how beneficial to A&M? Like you said, they need leaders in the locker room, and none better than him.
oh, it'd be huge on and off the field. No
Hmm.
question about it. You're talking about a guy who's respected by everybody. He had his own problems, didn't let it phase him. Obviously it ended up being, oh, how should we say, overzealous policing. But, he remained unflappable. It didn't bother him. He was off to a fantastic start. He's doing everything he wanted a guy to do when he could have been embarrassed and, just kind of, you know, withdrawn into himself.
Right.
But, uh, I think that on the field, if he comes back, Bobby Petrino is going to be praying to every god that he knows for in thanks, because all of a sudden you got yourself a real weapon,
Hmm.
and you put that out there with Moose Muhammad the way he was playing at the end of last year, Evan Stewart who came into his own, and then some of these newer guys, and your tight ends. You got some very nice pieces to play with, and I think that zero becomes option one immediately, because you're looking
Hmm.
at a guy who has proven that he can be a lead receiver, and he's versatile. He's not afraid to run over the middle. And, I think that's one thing that we're going to see a lot of is the use of the middle of the field. That was one thing that always drove me crazy, and you know this as well as anybody. The lack of the use of receivers on drag routes and crossing patterns in Jimbo's offense. So
Was like everything for that, and then
yeah,
out and like,
and on the other hand, Petrino uses a lot of that. He uses a lot of
mm-hmm.
movement. You know, he'll get things going like that. So I think that if you get Anais out there and Anais is healthy and you start getting him the ball, then all of a sudden teams will start to kind of, you know, lean towards him to try to take him out of the game. Then you're going to have favorable matchups for Evan Stewart and Moose.
Sure.
And that just opens up a whole world of options, you know, just with his presence. And then
Mm-hmm.
you add Tylen Smith, you know, they could have the attack of the killer Smurfs. You know, guys that are small, but they're really fast, really elusive. You know, you put Tylen out there with Anais and Evan and Micah Tees, and you don't have anybody over 5'11", but they can all fly.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, they have some weapons that they can play with, that they can certainly move around, and they have some options that you know, they can switch in and out. But when you start with a guy who is a fifth-year senior and he's already proven that he can make big plays in an offense that was pretty stagnant, uh, you know, I think that that would just be a huge boost to the whole thing. You know, it makes things a whole lot more dangerous across the board when you have Anais Smith to watch after.
Yes, it definitely does. Um, well, I certainly hope A&M, utilizes all their tools and the best. I hope for the best for Anaya Smith, whatever his decision may be. I know A&M fans are just tired of saying maybe next year, maybe next year. So do you think next year, this year, or this year will be the year A&M fans can be excited?
Well, I think there's reason to be excited. I think there's also reason to be curious and a little apprehensive, even. Uh,
Hmm.
you know, you sit there and you look at the gaps that they still have. You know, I wouldn't be thrilled with this linebacker group if that's what they go into the season with. You've got to get better with the running game. Uh, how are they going to fill out this coaching staff? Uh, is the offensive line going to improve? You know, things like that. What will Connor Weigman do in year two? How will the running game look without Devon A. Chain? You know, there are still questions. I mean, and we think that there are answers to those questions, but the proof is still in the pudding. You got to see it once it gets out there. So I think talent wise, yeah, there's reason for optimism. There's reason to be excited. But you know, if you're nervous and you're a little worried, yeah, I can see that too. So, you know, if you look at it and, you know, if you were to do a hard knocks at the college level, A&M
Hmm.
would be an absolutely fascinating subject matter next year.
Yeah,
You
that
know,
would be awesome.
yeah, I mean, but when you also look at it and consider, you know, you're going to have Jimbo, you're going to have Petrino, you're going to have Terry Price and guys like that, you know, it would have to be on HBO. Otherwise, it would just be like Morse code, you know.
That's
So,
so.
yeah, but yeah, I think that it would be you know, I don't know what it is, but I've had this hang up on Dallas the last couple of weeks. The old soap opera. You know, JR and Bobby and Sue Ellen and Pam and all this stuff. I don't know what it is, but you know, it's just been stuck in my brain. You know, but that kind of melodrama in the college ranks, I think this year you would sit there and it's like, what would be a good, you know, Dallas type team to watch? A&M and Ole Miss immediately come to mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, and depending on what Alabama does with their coordinators, that could be real interesting too. Uh, but I think that if you wanted a hard knocks or you wanted a soap opera kind of program where you don't know what's going to happen, but it's going to be really interesting one way or the other. You know, A&M is going to be right there.
Uh, who is Alabama? What are the rumblings as far as Alabama and their offensive coordinator?
You know, I haven't heard anything yet. You know, obviously it's not going to be Sarkeesian this time.
Hmm.
Uh, unless Texas decides to do something crazy. But
Mhm.
um, I think that they're in a situation much like A&M is with some of their assistants. You're not going to make a move today. You're not going to make a move tomorrow. You're not going to make a move Wednesday because it's National Signing Day. You could make a move Thursday because then you've got all your players locked down, and that's when you can go, ha ha ha! You thought this guy was your assistant? Wrong. He's gone. Uh,
Right.
and that's just that's
Major.
something that we've seen time after time after time. And
Mhm.
when stuff like that happens, it kind of makes you appreciate the portal a little bit more because then the players can go, ha ha, you thought I was staying and you screwed me on the assistant.
Right.
I'm out of here.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, but uh I think that A&M is going to make a move to get a secondary coach. I think that DJ Durkin is going to be the linebacker coach. I think I know who it is, but I'm not totally sure. And I think that it's somebody in the SEC who has a past history with Durkin. Uh, I
Mhm.
shall say little more than that. But I think there's going to be multiple changes on the offensive side of the ball. It's like I put in tidbits. It's like who's out recruiting.
Mhm.
Coley's out recruiting. Uh, Jimbo's out recruiting. Petrino's out recruiting. Running back coach is open. I don't see much of Damian Craig. I haven't seen anything of Steve Adazio. Uh, Coincidence?
Hmm.
Maybe not. And obviously now we got to watch Miami looking at Coley. So um, I think my gut feeling is that he'll stay, but I don't know that for sure. But if it comes down just to money, then you know we'll Miami's got a lot of money, A&M's got a lot of money, so
Mhm.
it'll be interesting to see where they go with that.
It
But
will be.
so I definitely think that they're not done with coaching hires, and
Mhm.
in A&M's case, and then in Alabama's case, I think once National Signing Day comes and goes, then Saban probably has a list of guys that he's already interested in, and he can really start to seriously, uh, you know, check their availability. I mean, I'm sure
Yeah.
that they have a pretty good idea of who would move and who would not at this point, but that's when you really get down to the nitty gritty.
So potentially a big week, National Signing Day, possibly some coaching movement. Anais officially come out with NFL or not. And then when does spring ball start?
To be determined. Uh, Probably the middle of March.
Okay.
That's usually about when it goes. So, it may be like a couple of practices before spring break, have spring break, come back, and then really, get to it for the rest of it. But at this point, they haven't made any announcements yet, so we'll see.
All right. Well, a lot to look forward to. Definitely tune back into Aggie Yell with such all the excitement going on this week, and for any news that might come up this week, tune into Aggie Yell. Mark and them have it all for you. Make sure you like this, share it, let us know what you think, and tune back in next week for the Aggie Yell F Word podcast.